Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, whatever time of day you are listening to this. Welcome to the Joygasmic Life podcast.
Right where you are right in this moment is exactly where you are meant to be. So, wherever that may be, just be.
To be a new you.
Your permission slip to raise your standards and live an even more amazing life. Now, if you're feeling like that's way out of the ball game and you're really suffering with like pain in your body, guilt, shame, anxiety, depression, like these emotions run a lot of people's lives, and that's not by accident. Our culture is set up to keep us in those emotions because it's easier to control people when they're in those emotions. But if you're on an awakening journey and you have recognized that those are there, you have taken the most crucial step to get out of that, which is to become aware that it's actually happening.
It's time to awaken, to bring all the parts of yourself back. Welcome. Explore the joy
to this journey.
Is your life.
Thank you.
You live full out, fully
you.
expressed,
Thank you.
fully harnessing
Love you.
the joygasmic potential of your body
Love you.
and yourself.
I love you.
Anything is
Thank
possible.
you.
And especially
I'm
we are here
sorry.
to tell you that
Please
deep
forgive me.
and fulfilling love
I love you.
is possible and is available for you
I'm
when you
sorry.
choose it for yourself.
Please forgive me. I love you. Thank you.
I'm so looking forward to sharing this conversation with you today. Today have the beautiful opportunity to interview Samantha Zipporah, who I encountered through somebody else, and was immediately enchanted with. She's a midwife, author, and educator in service to healing and liberation. Sam's path rises from an ancient lineage of midwives, witches, and wise women with expertise spanning the continuum of birth, sex, and death. She is devoted to breaking the spells of oppression in reproductive and sexual health by connecting women and people to the innate pleasure, power, and wisdom of the body. Her praxis weaves scientific and soulful inquiry that integrate modern medicine and data with ancestral practices and appeasing epistemologies. Sam's most recent publications and offerings center the radical reclamation of contraception and abortion. Her online membership, the Fruit of Knowledge Learning Community, which I'm a part of and is fabulous, features access to her heart and mind via books, courses, Q&As, curated resources, and more. You can check out the show notes for the link to her website to explore womb wisdom offerings and join the Fruit of Knowledge. Sam's music and memoirs can also be found on Patreon as The Venus Christ. I'm so looking forward to talking with her today. I hope you really enjoy this conversation. Samantha and I cover a whole bunch of things, including pleasure-centric contraception, the sacred yes, the wheel of consent. We talk a little bit about HPV and dysfunction, or quote, dysfunction in the female system, and what the root cause of that is and how to move through it. I share way more vulnerably than I was really intending to about my journey with navigating consent, fight, flight, fawn, and actually getting to a place of clarity, being able to engage with intimacy and and the journey of coming out of fawn and into like clear conversation. Samantha offers a really coherent experience of a body that has moved out of rape culture and lives in consent culture. She shares a bit about her experience of her partner caretaking her and custodianing her fertility and the importance of men who are fertile every day of the year, really taking care of how they impact the ecology around them, aka us women who are us womb havers who are only fertile for small periods of time. and how that really places the responsibility back on men. And yeah, I cry pretty hard about 3/4 of the way through, and we just kind of sit with that for a little bit while I come back. And so that's in there too. I just thought I'd include that because it's part of the experience, and part of the journey is just being really vulnerable about where I'm at, and allowing that to inspire you to have courage to face your own journey, and to also look at where you're still, where I'm, here's an example. This is where I'm still chunked up about it, and to allow that to inspire you to be courageous in your own healing journey and expand that yourself. And so I hope you really enjoy the conversation. I hope that it brings inspiration and connection to you. And thank you so much for being part of the community. Enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. Beautiful. Welcome, Sam, to the Joygasmic Life podcast. So glad to have you here. And thank you. I love that you've got the wood fire in the background. Looks really cozy.
Excellent. It's function. It's got some absolute beauty as well, but it's primarily functional. And thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I encountered you through your Fruit of Knowledge community, and have had a beautiful time, like sort of engaging with the plethora of information there. I think I really fell in love with your work and your teaching when you were like, I'm not certified in anything. And I was like, oh, thank God. Like, I need that. I need that in like a wise woman to just be like, no, not. That's not the path. And yet you have a plethora of knowledge and wisdom, and people who you're sharing that wisdom onwards to. Can you share a little bit about how you got started into sort of birth work, and then release of pregnancy work, and women's menstrual health in general?
Yes. So I started before I started bleeding. I'm one of those people who was gifted with a very clear guidance in terms of where I should be focusing. And part of that had to do with my own, capacity and intellect, but more of it had to do with the unfolding of the path and the universe and what it placed in front of me. Like, I feel like I would need to be both stupid and obstinate to have not gone into this work, in terms of just how many people were placed in my path, in my intimate sphere, who needed my support in this area. And I guess I didn't really even think about it being a career path or anything to do with capitalism at all, until my 20s. But I started literally when I was 11, studying, very much inspired by the suffering of my mother and my sister, and the general attitudes that were prevalent in society, and having this really clear inner knowing that the suffering that I saw, the feeling of subjugation rather than empowerment and pleasure, was not right for me, at least.
Yeah.
That I wanted to do it a different way. So yeah, I started studying. I'm just a very, I'm mostly autodidact. I'm a big reader. But yeah, reading and helping the people that showed up that needed help, which, I always joke the first doula job I did was helping somebody place a tampon when I was 11 and she was 12. And I really clearly understood the physiology and the process, and she didn't know what hole. So
oh my gosh, that's a mistake you don't want to make.
I talked her through the whole process, and yeah, so it's been most of my conscious life. I've been on this path. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And there is such a, it's so interesting that at 12 for your friend and you at 11, that you were the one walking her through that. It really points to how our culture has an absence of like wise women who are
Mm.
walking, the red tent is like, it's like, where's the red tent holding both of you, right?
Mm.
Where's the purple like elders, the crones being like, hey, like here's the mysteries, and already being steeped in that by the time you actually got to that age where that was relevant for you. It really points to that. And so thank you for, from a young age stepping into that big mantle and
Yeah.
supporting the people around you.
Yeah, thank you for seeing that. And really in recent years I've been able to like wallow a little bit more in my grief um around needing to be that elder
Mm.
when I was just a child. So I'm 36 now, and I supported my first dear one with an abortion when I was 16. I supported my first childbirth at 19, first
Mm.
miscarriage at 21, and I was on call for other people's uteruses for the majority of my young adult's life
Mm.
until just the last couple years. And um, yeah, it's been an interesting process of like getting to know different parts of my psyche that are
Mm.
available when I'm not on call.
Yeah, honoring
It's a
that like
really
inner
different
maiden.
existence. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
that
exactly. There's been a lot of reclamation of the inner child and the inner maiden, because at 11, I was already in the grandmother role. Like, I moved
yeah.
out at 16 and lived in a big house with a lot of roommates, and they literally called me grandma.
Wow.
Because I was
Yeah.
always telling them to quiet down because I was reading and like, cooking and
Uh,
talking to people about their feelings, and also obsessed with vintage. Always loved, like, always been wearing lots of vintage clothing. But
oh,
anyways,
that's
yeah.
funny. That's funny.
Mhm.
And so, what do you, if you could look back with the knowledge that you have now, like if you could have
Mm.
given yourself a rite of passage, at 11, be like, hey, sorry, childhood's over. Like, let's move into at least maybe not all the way into crone, but into that next phase, and
Mhm.
offered yourself a
Mhm.
rite of passage, or to women in
Mhm.
general. Like, what would build that? What would be in that?
Oh my goodness. I mean, in the total fantasy imaginatory realm, there would have been a red tent culture that I grew up with, and elders and matriarchs who were fully embodied in the wisdom of the power that we hold, and that, yeah, I would have been initiated into a tradition that had integrity and lineage, um, that was embodied in this dimension. I think that's been, a lot of my grief, is that I do feel so guided and so supported and so part of this lineage, but it doesn't feel grounded in human, like in this culture. In
Yeah.
my like in my lived experience, it has been so much from beyond. And it's
Mm.
interesting, like when I reflect on my journey, like the first decade, I would say, like ages 11 to 21 or so, I was obsessed with the science and the
Mm.
physiology.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
I felt that my validity and my power was in this awareness of the data and the physiology
Mm.
of how this all worked,
Mm-hmm.
as if the
Mm-hmm.
body were a machine, as if there were a correct way to operate it. And everybody
Mm-hmm.
was just like gunking up the gears and like didn't know how to maintain this beautiful machine. And it literally took me like a massive healing crisis. I had a uterine hemorrhage at age
Mm.
21, um, where I was taught that there's spiritual and emotional dimensions to the
Mm.
physiology, and maybe even the physiology is like a direct manifestation of the spirit.
Mm.
So I guess, I mean, going back into like the fantasy of what I wish I was offered would have been, um, an embodied culture and representation of this integrated mind, body, and spirit.
Mm.
with the womb that wasn't hyper focused or fetishized on the physiology,
Right.
or fully in the woo spiritual, like ephemeral space that like really was a balanced
Yeah.
and embodied culture around it. Because yeah, I clung to the physiology for a long time in ways that I'm still undoing, I think,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
to my detriment, right? Which in the way that the physiology, a lot of the knowledge we have around the physiology is data that has been created in patriarchal contexts.
Yeah.
Languages, science is a language that has been colonial and misogynist, and that there are these ancestral ways of knowing, these epistemologies of connection to the womb, connection to the earth and the plants and all these things that are actually superior
Mm. Primary.
than,
It's like
right,
that. That's the
right,
primary.
that's really
That's the
like our
primary nature of it. And then,
birthright.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Just like birthing and pleasure is our birthright. That's been like so
Yes.
twisted and
Oh.
modified by like all the programming, right? And I can see
Mhm.
that, like your young self and my young self and my current self to varying degrees as well, is like really steeped in this sort of like logical, rational, masculine,
Mhm.
like here's the data, here's the information, and um, absent of the history of like how much of a conscious decision that was by like powers that be to intentionally remove people from connection with their bodies. Public, was doing reading recently. I think it was Caliban and the Witch, and they were talking about, which I think you suggested maybe,
Mm,
um,
probably.
and they were talking about like early industrial revolution and this idea of turning the body into a machine, and then the growing disgust with that machine as it didn't perform as well or as reliably as actual machines, and sort of this sense of like public dissections as a way of normalizing like the abuse of the body. And you're just like, what the fuck, like that's so messed. But also like seeing how like that worked 200 years ish ago and whatnot, like has impacted us as young women, being like, oh yes, the science, the knowledge, like if we have all the knowledge we will know and we will be able to figure this out, and it's like, oh, that's actually try bleeding on the earth, try like singing during your period, try
Oof.
talking to wise women,
Mhm.
try like journaling what you're
Mhm.
pissed off about during that premenstrual
Mhm.
phase, and then work on
Mhm.
it during your next like ovulation phase, and really like work with the cycles and be in that, as opposed to any of the other things I just said before that, right? Is the logical, the linear, even the anger. Like the anger is like a fuel, but it's like we need to not get caught in it. We need to like
Mm.
recenter into those like wise woman practices of sensing into our bodies, like walking in the woods before our cycle starts, and then like cocooning when we're in it, and
Mm.
just really touching into that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's so much. So you mentioned something about pleasure centric contraception.
Yes.
I actually read pleasure centric conception, which I also think is very, very important.
Very
But
important.
pleasure centric contraception. So I'd love to hear your thoughts around this. You spoke really clearly in one of the recordings in your Fruit of Knowledge about
Mhm.
your journey of like no penis and vagina during the potential fertile phase, and I was like, whoa, like I was raised with an unconscious pattern that I've been undoing for decades of like
Yes.
men's pleasure comes first.
Yes.
Let's we're here for their pleasure. If we pleasure them well, we won't die. We won't be killed. We won't be raped. We won't be murdered. It's really strong. And like my husband's a wonderful human being, but I'm still working to like undo that
It's
with him.
multi-generational. Yes.
It's huge. And I think
Yes.
about that like young maiden who was really suffering in her like
Mm.
womb space. And I go like,
Mhm.
nobody in my family knew the history of sexual abuse that was going on at that point. But if we had known, or if we had listened to my body's inner wisdom, it would have been very apparent, right? What I was holding in my
Mm.
womb for that intergenerational. And so the idea of pleasure-centric contraception, really honoring that like the vagina is not a sheath
Mm.
for a penis.
Mhm.
It is not
Mhm.
like, it's its own creation. It's a palace that we can welcome them into when we want, only when we want, and really being in that. And I imagine all of that links up with pleasure-centric contraception because it's really about like good boundaries and being really clear in when the semen's in you and when it's not. I imagine that's like part of the core of conceiving when you want versus when you're unexpecting it. So I'd love
Yes.
to hear your thoughts on that.
Mm. Yeah, thank you for sharing and for speaking to that that feeling of obligation and fear that is very real, whether or not your current partner is a perfectly gentle and safe and kind person. That ancestral and collective consciousness
Yeah.
is very real. I mean, the part of our consciousness that is our ego, that is our actual lived experience and an individual self, to be able to actually live from that center rather than these programmed behaviors from the collective and from the ancestral, which can
Yeah.
be positive or negative. But we just need to understand that yes, that's valid. It's not like a failure on your part that you still feel that, but the ability to recognize it, articulate it, look at it, work with or through it. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say ultimately like become larger than it
Mm-hmm.
almost, so you understand like
Mm-hmm.
that rather than like cleansing yourself of that fear or that pain, that you just expand
I love that.
to be large enough to make a decision that is more whole and larger than that fear, that is to focus on your pleasure and to focus on your joy, that is accessible to you in the present moment, right? To leverage
Mm-hmm.
that. And
Mm-hmm.
so to speak to pleasure centric contraception, right? We go into these just like very cliche, but very helpful binaries, right? All binaries and dualism is an illusion, but they're useful for communicating sometimes, right? Of like fear versus love.
Mm-hmm.
And like, why are you avoiding pregnancy? Why are you practicing contraception? Is it rooted in fear or
Mm-hmm.
is it rooted in love? And knowing that your decisions that are rooted in love are going to often propagate more love
Mm-hmm.
and expansion of self. And when they're rooted in fear, they will often cultivate more fear and pain and constriction of self. And so I speak to this idea of the sacred yes, which is vital in contraception. And I developed it in counseling folks around abortion specifically, and being able to overcome the intense no that is the focus of
Mm-hmm.
most contraception and abortion
No
experiences.
pregnancy, no
No baby, no
baby.
baby, no baby, no baby, no baby. And so in a
Yeah.
simple contraception context, what is it that you are saying yes to conceiving and gestating and birthing and giving your vital essence to, that is not a child? And knowing that being able to actually articulate and name and focus and be in devotion to that yes is the medicine that allows you to expand to be in that space of wholeness and accessing the pleasure that is available to you, rather than staying in the fear of like, oh my God, sperm is the enemy. Oh my God, pregnancy is the enemy. Like it's the worst thing that could happen to me. And like actually putting your body in the right position to embody your sacred yes would involve being really mindful of when and how you're exposed to sperm, which
Yep.
if you're not in an abusive relationship should not be an issue. And if you are in a relationship where you feel obligated to be available for penetration and ejaculation at any time, we need to be aware that that is abuse, that is rape culture, that is not a common denominator of reality that we need to be accepting anymore.
Just sit with that
Yeah.
for a moment.
There's
It's
a
really
lot.
huge.
There's a lot there, but I mean, just worthiness is really a huge issue, I think, that comes up for people. I mean, there's all the religious programming. Like I grew up in a very conservative, religious, Christian and Mormon area in Idaho. And just even letting folks know that they're worthy of pleasure, separate
Huge.
from procreation.
Yeah. I mean, I hear
Yeah.
from women postpartum, like, how do I get back to sex because I know my husband's missing it?
Yes.
And I go like, what about you? Are you missing it?
Right.
It's like, are you trying to get back to sex because you feel obligated or like it's
Right.
important or you want to conceive another baby? But like sometimes you can conceive babies when not in like big pleasure, but I think a lot of the reason people struggle with conception is like, well, toxicity in the body and like sludge in the
Mm-hmm.
uterus, but also like bad
Mm-hmm.
sex that they're like not really that
Mm.
into. You go like, it's hard to make a really vibrant baby out of like so sex. It's one of my personal theories, but this idea that like women are trying to get back to sex because of sort of this like cultural programming that men want it and women should give it. It's like,
Mm-hmm. Well, you notice that I'm focused on pleasure, not on sex,
yeah, that
with
I'm just showing off my
contraception
own biases
also,
there.
right? And that
Yeah.
also as a culture, we need to be redefining our definitions of sex and expanding our ideas of what sex is, and that a
Mm,
penis in a vagina until it ejaculates is not sex.
mm,
It is a kind of sex.
mm,
It is a way that people have sex, but that is not sex. That our sexuality, our capacity for pleasure and intimacy is so much more expansive than that. And that
mm,
people that have our anatomy, back to the data, we don't come from that. We don't orgasm the best way from penetration. So
mm,
back to the contraception conversation, it's just like focused on pleasure. I would say also focused on intimacy,
mm,
but not focused on a penis until it ejaculates in a vagina. Like, and the ability to explore other aspects of our pleasure and intimacy in ways that we connect and feel together and have
mm,
orgasms and have expansion that are not a penis in a vagina till it ejaculates, but that is a way to do it. That excludes all of our queer kin as well. It's invalidating the kinds of sex that they have if you're going to define sex as a penis and a vagina.
mm.
And
Indeed.
just, yeah, that we have capacity for so much pleasure that is not that one particular act that creates a risk of pregnancy.
Mm. Yeah, there's so many other forms of
Mhm.
intimacy
But
and
yeah, how to
connection.
come into worthiness where you're not thinking that your vagina is in service to this other person's satisfaction that can only happen in one way.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that is a massive undertaking for our collective and individuals. And I think fantasy is one of the most useful tools for
Interesting.
that, for us in general, and would be one of the things like unsolicited in terms of like postpartum women, like
Mm,
if they could get to the point where they can fantasize
mm,
first prior
mm,
to even worrying about the physicality of it,
mm,
to that is the first thing that they deserve,
It's like
is
it
the
connects in with
space,
what really makes them feel
a
good.
connection with their own desire and imagination around it that is not about pleasing somebody else.
Mm,
And then being able to speak that to your partner, which could be very sexy to them.
mm. Indeed. Indeed.
Mhm.
Yeah. That reminded me of in my immediate postpartum, I used imagination and fantasy about dancing, because dancing seemed so out of the realm of what my physical body was available for next. Was like, oh, to even be like free in that movement and to just spend time imagining that freedom of movement and the safety of like squatting and doing like a tribal
Mm.
like right, just sort of that movement. And it's like, oh, there was fantasy
Mm-hmm.
there. And then yeah, that space of like, oh, this is what I'm really craving when I fantasize about connecting with you again. This is what comes up, this is what arises, as opposed
Mm.
to, and like
Mm-hmm.
really utilizing, because that postpartum is such a restorative, regenerative, like recreation time. It's like the way that we do things in that time period shapes how we walk in the next phase of our lives until we
Mm.
walk through that portal
Mm-hmm.
again. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's whether it's a pregnancy release, full term or not, whether it's like a conscious abortion, whatever. It's like how we treat that postpartum,
Mm.
regardless of where it is in that pregnancy journey. It's like really
Absolutely.
important in terms of that. And so the invitation to sort of like a giant, think of the postpartum like a giant period. Go like, oh, it's a good time for journaling. It's a good time for clarifying. It's a good
Mm.
time for tuning into that inner wisdom that's there
Mm-hmm.
and wants to speak. And
Mm-hmm.
when I think about my own postpartum, it was like, oh, I was really clear on like what would feel nourishing for me, but I was still working through layers of being able to actually communicate that. And then
Mm.
kind of just
Mm-hmm.
defaulted back to like what I had been doing previously, which is like penises and vaginas are for pleasure. They go together.
Mm.
And you go like, indeed, they do when you want to, when it feels good, when it's the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But
But
just this
also,
narrow
yeah,
definition.
super narrow. Yeah. Just,
Yeah.
yeah, this whole conversation, I'll be like, oh, I still have a long way to go. Or it's
Yeah.
like really like that idea of like expanding beyond, like expanding
Yes. I
beyond.
think it's
So it's like, oh,
so
that's,
vital.
it's not like, it's not about clearing out the silence. It's about like being able to let the voice be there and speak
Mm.
and have that
Mm-hmm.
be okay, and have like the love encompass the uncomfortable conversations, and have the love encompass the sort of like the sense of like personal contraction, and go like, yeah, this feels really uncomfortable, but like also I love
Oh,
myself enough to like speak this very uncomfortable truth, and I love myself enough to, I love my partner and myself enough to like trust that our relationship can hold this, and just be in all of that.
I love that insight. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that we have a cultural obsession with being pure or being cleansed of what we perceive to be bad or wrong, and the ability to really embrace and integrate that part of yourself, but not let that part of you drive.
Yeah.
It's like you have a seat at the table, but you are not sitting at the head of the table, the part of you that doesn't want to say anything, that wants to behave, to be good, and all of that. It's like you welcome them into the fold. You don't try and kick them out of the room, because they will
Hmm.
cause way more trouble. If you try and kick them out, they'll be like banging on the door and causing a ruckus. And you're like, no, you could sit there. You can speak for a while, but I'm going to ask you to shut up or to go, like, you need to sit down, and this is the lady who's running the board meeting
Yeah,
here.
yeah. You're welcome to talk to the lady who's running the board meeting. She'll be talking to your partner, not you, because we've already
Yeah.
tried that. We know how that goes. It ends up with everybody feeling a bit frustrated,
And this
right?
is,
It's
yeah,
like,
going into, if people want to like look more into getting support for this type of dialogue, just parts work in psychology
yeah,
is super nourishing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. You
Hmm.
talked about sort of these like bad parts of us, and one of the topics that we wanted to
Mm.
talk about is sort of the sense of dysfunction within the female body, within the womb,
Ooh.
or disease, right? It's like, I remember in
Hmm.
my sexual, like we talked about rites of passage. It's like, oh, my rite of passage into awareness about sexuality was like grade 7 health class. Diseases pregnancy, watch out, they're gonna get
Mhm.
you, right?
Oh
And it's
yeah.
like, oh, it's like so strong, and it's like you gotta make sure to work with and prevent that. And then now I have this knowledge that like most healthy people have most of these diseases in their system. They're just not in
Mm-hmm.
dominance. They're not in overgrowth. They're not in, you know, a space of challenge. And so I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to hear your thoughts on sort of that sense of womb health and how that relates to
Mm.
HPV or vaginismus or other
Oh,
sort of dysfunctions that you
yeah.
see commonly, or other
Well, I mean,
whatever came
even
up to
the
your mind, because you were like, oh, it's like, oh, she wasn't thinking
yeah,
about that.
I mean, even the term dysfunction, right? I think that, understanding the body as an ecosystem that is inherently whole and inherently life-seeking, like seeking flow, seeking integration, seeking balance, dynamic balance, right? Constant flow, constant
Mm,
dynamic balance. There is no stasis in a healthy ecosystem. There is no control. There is no dominance of the human mind in a healthy ecosystem. Could be part of the system, but to attempt to dominate is going to create obstructions and dysfunction or
mm,
dis-ease. So I mean, there's so much there, like in terms of the pathologizing of the entire reproductive and sexual system of women, uh, based on the fear that Christian patriarchal overculture narratives have had forever. And we could go
yeah,
back to the story of Eden, and the inspiration
trouble,
for naming
trouble.
my membership the Fruit of Knowledge, which I was raised Jewish and I call myself a Jewitch. Um, and I still observe a lot of the rituals and traditions in that culture, and that ancient Hebrew term for sex is knowledge as well.
Mm,
So the Bible, the five books of Moses prior to the translation, which had, of course, very political and ideologic objectives, the people that were translating the
mhm.
Aramaic and the Hebrew into English, that they chose knowledge instead of sex.
Which is a huge piece of that transition from matriarchal cultures to patriarchal Catholicism.
Yeah,
Like
it's pretty
huge, huge.
fascinating stuff. So that's quite a
What's the
tangent, but
actual knowledge in what's the actual word in Hebrew? I'm just
da'at,
curious.
da'at,
Ta'at.
D-A''A'-T, da'at. And it's like a colloquial term. You find it throughout the rest of the text. He knew her, and then she knew her husband.
Mm,
They made love. It's
mhm,
used throughout the text,
mm,
and so I think that that's part of the sea that we're swimming in
mhm,
terms of demonizing or pathologizing or rejecting or attempting to dominate. And that story is, just a symbolic story of the attitudes. It's
mhm.
it's all of these intertwined things. Um, and speaking of, I mean, HPV specifically, or any viral infection and presence in the body, I think, most people think of those things as enemies that are going to destroy or hurt you, when in fact, yes, we are generally carrying them. And if we have a vital immune system, then we're able to suppress and keep it in balance.
Mhm.
And even like pulling this all the way back to the metaphor of like parts work in
Mm,
our psychological and emotional selves, if the whole of you is nurtured and nourished and vital enough, those disparate parts that could cause a ruckus or create pain, create challenges, create cancer, will be in check.
mm,
And rather than trying to think that you're going to clear or cleanse or rid yourself or be pure of these things, the answer is actually nourishment, not
mm,
deprivation. The
mm,
answer
mhm.
is wholeness and nourishment of the entire system, rather than the demonizing and the rejection of these things that we think are causing harm. So that was a big wandering response to a rather expansive wandering question. I will let you take whatever thread out of that you most enjoyed, and we can follow it further.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's really, I think that ties into sort of like the sense of womb health as a whole, right? In our capacities, like our wombs don't necessarily they don't operate optimally, as in they give us pain, or they sort of lead to these like journeys of Western medical diagnosis and medical panic, right? When we have challenges with them, partially because women are so undernourished and undercared for and undersupported in general, right? It's like,
just like,
oh, spend 6
mineral
months
absorption alone. If we could just get that.
It's like spend 6 months tending your gut and doing some vaginal steaming and improving your diet. Let's see what happens with your PMS and your excessive bleeding, or your lack of bleeding, or your inability to conceive, or your symptomology, whatever it might be. It's like there's so much to be done there with like really, really simple tools, like things you're doing every day, like what are you putting into your mouth, right? And so I really appreciate that piece of, oh, this is really about like it's not about this part of the womb. It's like, how's the woman doing, right? How is the whole woman doing? She run around like a chicken with her head cut off 24/7, 365 days a year? Could she use some like rest and healing, some support, some like peace and quiet during that womb time? Probably, right? You
Well,
can
and
just
that's very rarely, like there's no dysfunction. Like we use the term dysfunction or disease, but it's all like our bodies are doing a perfect job under
like
the conditions that they're operating in.
Yeah, it's like a warning sign. Like a personal story from my life is like, there was a period of time in my, would have been late teens, where I was like, polyamory, woo! And I was dating 2 guys, neither of which were like really a great fit for me. And I had like I had 3 dates back to back. It was like 1, 2, 3. And I was about to head to the 3rd date. And I had so much sex stuff that I wasn't talking about. And I ended up in that, right? I was operating fully in that, like, my vagina is for your pleasure, like whatever you want to do, let's do that. And I ended up with, I had chronic recurring kidney, like in urinary tract infections at that time.
I was going to say, this sounds like a UTI coming.
And I chronic recurring
into
at that
kidney.
point, into the kidney, because I didn't want to go on that last date. I was like, I know what's going to happen there, and I don't actually want to be there, and I have no capacity to like actually state that out loud, because I'm so like steeped in the silence, and like I'm like 15 years into that now, and I still am like working to expand beyond the silence. Thanks for that metaphor. But like my body was like, we know what you want to do. It isn't go, have not so great sex with this person again, and you don't know how to say that, so we'll just send you to the hospital instead with like searing pain. And I was like, oh. And then somewhere in that journey it was like, oh, like if I pee after sex, that's helpful. And then later I was like, if I just don't have sex, I don't want to have. This is much, much more helpful.
That's the most helpful.
much more helpful.
Or if you redefine sex
I'm
to embrace your actual sexuality versus the like specific act of penetration, because like maybe you could have pleasure, intimacy with those people if you knew how to articulate your desires. And they could have been stoked on it. But I hear the UTIs are UTIs and kidney infections, classic. And yeast infections.
Really great example.
Also, and just a little bit of anatomy education for folks around UTIs and arousal specifically is the reality that when we are fully aroused, when our genitals are fully engorged and full of blood and juiciness and fluids, which is how they ought to be prior to any penetration at all, fully engorged, then the tissues around the urethra are so engorged that they create a gate that is very challenging to get past. That the engorgement, the arousal itself is a protective process. That arousal is protecting your urethra from bacteria being able to enter it. When it's properly lubricated, there will be fluids that are moving generally outward from that whole part of your body, and the engorgement will be such that the walls of the urethra will be pressed upon to make it much more difficult for bacteria to come in. And then beyond that, the engorgement of the vaginal tissues, the raising of the womb from the contraction of the ligaments from the face of the vulva to the top of the uterus, pulling the cervix and the uterus up out of the vagina to protect it from being hit with penetration. And so just to really respect and exalt the system of our sexual arousal as being defense against injury, against pathogens and disease, and that in and of itself is amazing protection against these issues happening, is the simple but profound radical act of actually demanding that your body is fully aroused before it be penetrated.
Yeah. It's just like sinking in. I just go like, oh shit. To like my past self is just like,
oh, we love her. She's welcome. We are not, yeah. Yeah, it is, but it is. It's kind of profound. They're like, oh wait, this is the physiology? Is that like my body prefers to be in pleasure
yeah,
than to be in fear?
Oh, these issues that I was having were like would not even be an issue if I'd done like the preventive, or not the preventative, but the like the pre-work, right?
If you'd been turned
It's
on,
like
if you'd been
if I'd actually been
fully
turned
aroused.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fully
and it's
aroused
like,
in your body instead of just your mind, which is another really strange phenomena that I think also has to do a lot with cultural conditioning, non-concordance, which is when we can be physically aroused but mentally not interested in sex, or vice versa, where we're mentally, psychologically aroused and desiring sex, but our bodies are not responding. And that happens 50% of the time for people with vaginas.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's really wild. So like knowing what your body needs to be fully juiced up, to be safe, not just for your mental satisfaction, but for your physical safety.
Physical safety and like avoidance of like those chronic sort of like deep womb things that can happen when we're like chronically not honoring ourselves, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Not to mention, I was thinking about the vagus nerve and how that touches into all of the cervix, right? It's like the whole central nervous system is like, oh, it like really, it touches into all of those places, and so that really being relaxed and really aroused, and how that all those the cervix, but also like all of those vaginal tissues are really innervated and connected to that vagus nerve. They are the vagus nerve.
So vital
in that part of the body.
Yes. And I've counseled a lot of people who have passed out or vomited or gotten crazy adrenaline shakes when they thought that they wanted the sex they were having, but their body was not safe. Their body didn't feel safe. And that whole nervous system activation can happen. Yeah.
Or passing out,
or
like
memories.
Losing,
it could even
losing
be like past
flashbacks
traumas that are moving through you. It could even be your fucking grandma's stuff that moves through you also. And that we need to also understand that that's part of the veil that we are lifting anytime that we are moving energy in our pelvis, in our wombs, in our vaginas, that this is the energy that lifts veils between spirit and matter. And we need to be with people that are safe for those things to happen with also.
Yeah. Yeah. People who can hold us in the varying phases of emotion and sensation and the,
And who
I
will
think,
be responsible with their sperm, no matter
indeed,
what.
indeed,
Responsible.
indeed, indeed. So big,
Big
so
stuff.
big.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any, you mentioned you fucking grandmas. And I was like, indeed, indeed,
Pardon.
grandmas.
I've been doing a lot of my grandma's work lately.
Mm-hmm.
I've been between like, do I want to put up a boundary and be like, I don't want to do this work anymore for you? Or is this, I'm strong enough and capable and can be of service. Like, I don't need to pass this on. Yeah. Grandma stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not my stuff.
I remember when I realized that I used to get flashbacks of like dead cow carcasses when I was having
Ah,
like physical like penis and vagina sex.
yeah.
And I remember when I like finally was like, oh, maybe this is because like my central nervous system is like out of whack. I'm not actually here and turned on. I'm actually like disassociating. And the physiology of the disassociation is linked to this other experience of like rape experience that isn't even physically mine, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
oh, who knows if that's the actual thing, but like I drew a line between them.
That makes a lot of
And
sense to me.
and like those experiences stopped happening when I got more clear on like whether I wanted to be in that situation or not. Right. And like prioritizing that arousal and not being in, because you're talking about the central nervous system and the vagus nerve and that like
Yes.
fight or flight. And it's like those
Yes.
frozen bits from like our ancestors, like they, especially in the women line, right? That woman
I think
line.
it's really important to also name faun. It's
Oh, yeah.
fight, flight, freeze, and faun.
Yeah.
Which is all of the sex that is had out of obligation. We might freeze during the sex too. We might have those vomiting, crazy experiences that could be the flight activation stuff too, but like that fawning is a trauma response.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
that
a
was
survival.
Yeah. That was a huge, I first heard about faun actually this last September from a friend of mine. And I was like, I've been doing that my whole life. I think that's every time I've had sex, that's what I was doing. Oh my God. It was like, oh, and I was living with a little dog who like, when you tried to tell her what to do, she would roll over on her back and just lie on her back and be like, I can't do anything. All I can do is lie on my back. I'm so overwhelmed.
Oh, honey.
Oh my God. Oh my God, I think that was my life. My whole life. Not just the sex bits, all of it. It's like, oh, and that actually like just a little bit of like storytelling because I do talk about this elsewhere on the podcast, but like that experience of realizing that actually initiated I called it a 30 days of no sex, 30 days of like no intimacy. Just to create a break to go like, okay, can I actually do that? The answer was no. I didn't know how. Right. I was like, we're not going to do anything like intimate or connected for 30 days just to like shake that faun out. And because that felt like the medicine that I needed. And yeah, I talk about it more and more elsewhere, but just to be in both of those, because I also talk about doing 30 days of intimacy and like 30 days of being in connection. And it's like to be able to do both and move between them and be in like clarity of communication to move ourselves out of that space of I'm on my back, whatever you want. Right. Which I think is like not just my journey.
No.
Right. It's other people's journey as well.
Are you familiar with Betty Martin and the Wheel of Consent?
Not like super intimately. I will.
Yeah.
I'll write that down and check it out.
It's excellent tool that really the foundation of, ooh, cute. The foundation of that tool is the question, who is it for? When there's touch, who is it for? And really getting clear on the difference between giving and taking and receiving. And the motivation can be different. You can be giving for your own pleasure, or you could be giving for the other person's pleasure. And you could be receiving for your own pleasure or receiving for the other person's pleasure. And just being able to actually discern and speak about that with your partner at different points, and what your intentions are. It's a really powerful tool to move through that wheel. And then I'll also share just the definition of consent, that I love to go into the etymology of most things, but consent specifically is con, together, and sentir, feeling. So rather than permission, which is a default in our culture with the medical industry and with sexual partners and things, you think that consent is something that you give, that is akin to giving permission to have something done to you, rather than a resonance that is felt together, that it's not actually something you can give to another person. You can have it with them. You can have it together. You can't really be given or received, because it's a continuous reality of the felt experience where you're feeling together. It's not in isolation, and it's not an individual thing that is given or taken. It is something that is between multiple parties, that is together felt.
Yeah, and when you say that, I feel like, oh, I know that feeling too. Like that's a very
good.
That's a
Good.
very like clear feeling in the body. And you're like, oh
Yes.
yeah. And then you're like, oh, what about all those other moments?
Yeah.
And that's where the work is to
That's where the work is, to come into the wholeness of the feeling.
Yeah.
In a culture that has, systematically desensitized and encouraged dissociation, particularly in this part of our bodies.
And that disconnection you were talking earlier about, sort of like the head can be on board with intimacy and the hips cannot, or the hips can be on board and the head cannot, and sort of the disconnection between those two.
Yeah.
Do you have an exercise or like a meditation or something that you suggest to people to like bring sort of coherence between those two?
I mean, the most simple thing is really to bring your consciousness into your breath and see if you can feel your breath throughout your whole body. I do love Taoism. In general, it is my favorite system of energy anatomy, and I've studied several. And so like a simple microcosmic orbit breath through the Taoist tradition, where you pull your breath up your yang, your spinal channel, to the crown, and then down through the roof of your mouth and the front channel, the yin channel, the soft body. That's one really simple exercise, but just that clarity and awareness that breath does embody our consciousness. There's an amazing, amazing, profound capacity for healing and presence when we're able to bring our full consciousness into our breath and into various energy centers in our body. And just like, can you breathe into your perineum? Can you breathe into your vulva? Can you breathe into your vagina? Can you breathe into your uterus? And understanding that, like, again, back to that amazing power of the imaginal realm also, that if you are not quite there, then the act of imagining what it would feel like and doing the efforting work, even if you get frustrated, you're like, I can't feel it. That even the time spent in imagination is helping form the synapses, is helping create the connections. And even literally, there is scientific study data around when we bring our thoughts to different parts of our bodies, they receive higher circulation. Our bodies will connect and nourish that space more when we bring our mental, our conscious selves to it. So breath is a great vehicle for that consciousness.
For that focus and
Yeah.
creating that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And how much breath holding happens, or how much like breathing happens in intimacy and all the varieties of sex, rather
Coming
than sort of like
lower
a
into the belly and into the vulva is like bringing it down. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's so juicy. There's so much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so pleasure centric contraception.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've been talking, there's like the consent piece, and there's sort of like health in the body and balance in the body, and this piece of connecting, with intimacy that is not penis and vagina sex, but like the
Mm-hmm.
wide variety of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so your sort of like philosophy around that, or your idea around that, is that like if we're focusing on pleasure, we're probably focusing on many there's a wider variety of things to do that isn't like no penis in the vagina, no semen in the vagina, right? There's a whole
Mm-hmm.
bunch of other things to be paying attention to
Mm-hmm.
that are fabulously entertaining as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so like if you were taught, like, I sort of go like, yeah, well, I'll just use myself because why not? But I go like, I've started and tried to have these conversations with my partner, and it's like he's
Mm-hmm.
generally on board, but like wants me to guide that experience, uh,
Mm-hmm.
or and my default is not that. My default is like faun. We've been talking about, and so.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when I bring it up, I go like, well, just no coming. Just don't come. That's the solution. That's how I know how to like orient towards to all the other forms of pleasure, because like I've really enjoyed those at various times in my life
Mm-hmm.
in
No,
various
for
ways
either
with
one of
different
you, or
partners.
for neither one of you, or just him?
I generally come at it from like just him. I go like let's work on
Yeah.
uh like I go, if we take that out of the equation, or if we take that out of the conversation for a period of time, not forever, then
Mm-hmm.
like we can focus on these other things without having to think about that so much. But like there's a
Mm.
lot of resistance there, and I think not just from my husband, but also from like men in general, who have been like oriented around like the dopamine cycle of like
Mm.
pornography and like
Mm-hmm.
quick secret jerk offs and stuff like that, right? There's like the culture is like very
Mm.
much about like quick masculine
Yeah.
pleasure, and like
Mm-hmm.
the exclusion of the hours of female pleasure and male pleasure that are like available when we sort of broaden what being in pleasure together is. So I guess my question would be like, do you have it, like, how would you counsel that, or like what would you suggest in terms of getting partners on board, or like what are there some, maybe the
Mm.
Taoist stuff you mentioned, obviously there's like a plethora of
Mm.
information there.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm.
I feel so
Mm.
naked right now. That's fine. I'll just
Oh, let's just take a breath. Let's take a
vulnerability.
little grounding breath. Yeah, that's a lot. I really think the sacred yes is an important tool. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm.
Thanks.
You are so welcome. Mm. Mm. Yeah. And this is okay. You can edit or we can do it again. And I don't want to interrupt this like release for you at all. Yeah, just let it totally move and express itself. You're safe.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay to be how you are. Mm.
I just feel like so out of control and so ashamed of what I've done to my body.
Mm.
I'm like still really stuck
Yeah.
in it sometimes. I'm sorry. This is.
Yeah.
I understand you're
Okay.
okay with this right now.
Yeah.
Just let that be
It's
okay.
painful. Yeah. Yes, the pain of labor.
Oh, labor. Oh, God.
Mm. There's no, I mean, that pain is always a communication about, right, how we need to move. Mm. 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 Mhm. Mm. Mhm.
Just gonna get something for my nose.
Yeah. Mm.
You're still muted? I saw you. You're welcome.
Yeah. Mm. Mhm.
This is a really great example of like uh that love being bigger thing you were talking about. Because all
Mhm.
through the conversation so far, it's like really clear to me
Mm.
that you're speaking from a more coherent, more consent oriented, less fawning thing that I am.
Mm. Mm.
I feel like, oh darn, I still have so much work on this. There's so much expansion to like happen, and it feels
Mm.
tricky. And then, yeah, uh, this, yeah, I'll just be with where I'm at. It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. We can also like, we can reschedule, we can let it go, we can just chat for a little bit, whatever you're needing for it.
Oh yeah, I mean, generally my mode of
Mhm.
operating and my sharing and teaching is to just bring the most vulnerable parts of myself to the surface and
Oh
share
yeah.
that for other people's experience. I mean, that's why my memoir is
Mm.
full of the most challenging sexual experiences of my life. And I actually did finish
Yeah.
publishing it along with the
Okay.
learnings, but like that's just sort of
Mm.
in how I operate.
Okay.
Yeah. So probably it'll just be as it is. Then I can make that decision later.
Yeah, if it serves. Hmm. Mhm.
Mm.
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 This is actually my next big offering that I'm birthing.
Mm.
Is the sermon for the spermin.
Sermon for for the men.
Yeah.
Mm.
Hmm.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's actually a lot to um, be a woman whose like ancestry is steeped in silence and
Hmm.
submission to
Hmm.
actually take the lead in even bringing it up as a topic or
Hmm.
and then to be asked to like take the lead in terms of continuing to navigate enthusiastic consent and being asked to take the lead in what those conversations are about and like how to actually move forward with that. It's really hard. It's hard for me at least. Yeah, especially postpartum. Yeah, because a lot of people are navigating this with small babies they're very responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
At least the women in my community. And what I've seen is that like
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the few people who's actually trying to have this conversation. A lot of women just default into doing and be and like functioning and um,
Mm-hmm.
just like getting taking care of the kids. And that's a huge part of how we ended up with like generations of very masculine oriented men who would just do the things that needed to be done as opposed to like feeling their feelings and asking for
Mm-hmm.
the gentleness and the healing and the yeah things we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So we can maybe we get like a little preview of the sermon for the spermin.
So the sacred yes is the umbrella overall, is really getting clear on what the yes is. And ideally, the yes is like larger than their own ejaculatory process in terms of what they're wanting to co-create with sex,
Mm.
right? It's getting really clear on what it is that you are wanting to co-create when you engage in sexual activity, rather than being passive or operating without conscious intention. Is really exploring that question. And then the rest of the structure is built upon the idea that our bodies are the earth, and that men have a responsibility to steward the cycle
Mm.
and to be aware of how their impact affects the ecosystem,
Hmm.
their choices and their actions. So it's going in deep into the specifics of that ecosystem and how it functions, to be able to be intentional whenever there's anything they do that can affect that ecosystem. And that idea that there is an integrity in the cycle, that if you're avoiding pregnancy, then you are saying yes to ovulation and yes to menstruation in dynamic balance, in the same way that we would be mindful in coming to this piece of land of like, where are we putting the house? How are we putting the water systems in? Like, how are we affecting the whole ecosystem? How does the ecosystem function without us inserting our will and desire into that system? And then when and if we are going to move into a way of co-creating with that system, we can do so intentionally. And so the principles of permaculture are actually the guiding questions that we use
Hmm.
for how are we using our bodies? How are we using our power? How are we using our sperm? Are we using them in service to our sacred yes?
Hmm.
That's the general premise.
Hmm. Hmm.
Which is really also an end to rape culture.
Hmm.
The difference between consent culture and rape culture is the difference between power over versus power with. Like, are we seeking to have power over, or are we seeking to have power with the forces of nature that are animating all of being, that is moving through our lover's body in the menstrual cycle, in the ovarian cycle, respecting that as a manifestation, as a microcosm of how fertile energy and creative energy moves through the universe. And this concept of stewardship, really, that is the responsibility, is stewardship and humility rather than dominance,
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
really exalt the cycle and its flow.
Hmm. Really relish the excitement of ovulation and like nurture the quietude of the menstruation and the journey
Mhm.
between.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive revolution of the dominant paradigm for sure. And I'm not sure how it will impact. We're going to have our first live circle at a local farm the end of April and early May. And it will be my first time. My partner is actually co-teaching with me for our first time.
Nice.
And we'll see how it goes. And then, the idea is to develop an online offering as well, but to offer it first just in person in circle. And it's always a shared responsibility. I mean, there's some other resources I would throw out, like Cam Fraser is a sex educator that I adore. I've been on his podcast twice. Men, Sex, and Pleasure, I think is the name of his podcast. And he has e-courses that really integrate some of the Eastern energy anatomy, the Tantra and the Tao into it, which again, like, it's orgasm and ejaculation are not the same thing. Even though a lot of people are not aware of or capable of separating them, they are not the same physiology, actually. They often coincide, but they are not the same. And it is absolutely possible for people with penises to have multiple orgasms without ever ejaculating or risking pregnancy with their partner. So that all goes back to energy awareness and breath as consciousness and the ability to focus. So that's a whole other, learning curve for sure. But it's important for us to know that they don't have to ejaculate to have orgasms. So everybody can have orgasms and nobody can be at risk for pregnancy. Absolutely possible.
Just like a paradigm busting sort of concept
really
for a lot of people. Yeah. You mentioned that you're teaching with your partner coming up. Was like in your journey, did you feel like was this something that was sort of like already well established within you when you guys met? Or is this something that's like navigated and you sort of like grown together in it?
I mean, we've absolutely grown together, and he has been the most enthusiastic student. I mean, I didn't even have an imagination that allowed for a partnership like this in many, many ways, but specifically around cycle stewardship. He knew nothing when we met. He knew absolutely nothing, but he was so open-minded and so enthusiastic. I actually had to reprimand him because he was reaching out to all of his old high school and college friends and proselytizing, which is part of where the title, the joke of the title, the sermon for the sperm comes from, was the fact that like he was like evangelical about practicing fertility awareness and like how harmful conventional contraception is and how amazing it is that if you pay attention to these 3 primary biomarkers and put your sperm in the right place, that you can avoid pregnancy without your partner being harmed in any way, and that it's like 100% his responsibility is his attitude, which is not something that works for everybody. And a lot of people will be like, no, it's a shared responsibility, but that's really how we roll. It's his responsibility to be aware of where his sperm is. It's not mine to play defense. Like it's my job to be in surrender and to be in my pleasure, and not to be like having to defend myself from the possible violence of a pregnancy, which could literally kill me. Not that I want to put it out there that pregnancy could kill you or that it's a pathology, but like literally it is dangerous, and their sperm carries a lot of gravity. So
and you have to, it's life altering and life changing either way. And I think part of pregnancy is coming to terms with the possibility of your own death and the baby's death. Like,
well, and that you are going to die
to be on that journey
to become a mother. Like part of you will die.
Yeah.
There's no way to go through it without actually acknowledging the fact that like a part of your life cycle is going to go through death in order to give birth. And that's more metaphorical than physical. But
Oh
yeah,
no,
my
it's
journey,
more physical than metaphorical because of the DMT.
it's real.
Because of the DMT, which takes you
Yeah.
right to that veil, like you talk
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I guess, I mean, I was so clear in my intentions and needs when I met my current partner. We've been
Mm,
together about 5 years, and I met him a year after a divorce.
mm,
And I started practicing fertility awareness when I was 19
mm,
and tracking my 3 primary fertility signals. And all of my partners were at least respectful, if not enthusiastic. Like everyone was
mm,
respectful. I never had anybody that was disrespectful of
mm,
my choice of contraception and my style of communication around it.
mm,
But my current partner, Nicholas, was the first person that was like way beyond respectful into like enthusiastic, like acts of service are his main love language.
mm,
And he just like takes so much pride in being
mm,
fully responsible. And like he
mm,
literally takes my temperature in the morning,
mm.
like while I'm still half asleep when he's up getting ready for work, he will take my temperature and he will chart it on a graph
Yeah.
in order to confirm ovulation with that biomarker,
Wow.
because it's
Yeah.
something that he can do.
Yeah. And it's super
Um,
simple. It's not like
it's
like
not rocket
doesn't
science.
doesn't matter who takes the temperature, right? And especially if
Yeah.
he's got a regular wake time.
Yeah. Yep. He's up at
That's super
5
helpful.
usually.
Yeah.
Yep. Horse lips
Uh-huh.
for birthing.
Yeah.
But yeah, wouldn't that be cool if more dudes thought it was sexy?
Yeah.
You
Sexy to
know,
be in.
responsible,
Yeah.
responsible
Yeah.
for the fact that they are fertile every day.
Yeah. And we're only fertile for like 5 days, maybe.
Yeah, 3 to 6 on average.
Yeah.
That it's really not appropriate for us to be constantly harming ourselves or on the defense or in this space of constriction and fear
Mm,
where we need to like protect ourselves from the offense of impregnation, that like our most intimate lovers, that it ought to be their like
mm,
highest good, their absolute joy
mm,
to be protective of our bodies and to
mm.
be treating them like a temple and a sanctuary.
Well, and in alignment with their own sacred yes as to like whether they want to be conceiving or
Right.
not,
Well, that you need to
right?
discuss that
It's like, yeah,
on a regular basis.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Every cycle, even maybe. I mean, I know when we were in like preconception with my second baby, it was like
Mhm.
every month it was like, hey, this is coming up. Are we doing this month? It was like, nope, not this month.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, next month,
I think every time that
maybe.
you get turned on, actually,
Oh wow, yep.
is how often I recommend actually articulating your sacred yes. Yep. It takes 5 seconds.
Yeah. What am I wanting to create right now?
What is it that what is the goal of this sexual act?
Yeah.
Is it feeling connected? Is it feeling pleasure? Is it having an orgasm? And where does the sperm go
Super important.
in order for that to happen?
Yeah.
Because you can't be in your highest pleasure and feeling fully safe and surrendered if you don't desire pregnancy and there's a threat of one occurring.
Hmm. Yeah.
You're not going to have as great of an orgasm.
Yeah, there's like a lack of
If
like
you do
full alignment,
have
especially
one.
if you're talking about like women sort of I think of women as like orienting to their sexual turn on like from the top down. It's like they got to get their vision aligned and then communicating clearly and then like aligned in their heart and then like yes, this is the right person and there's solar plexus and it's like all of that, right? So then the
Mhm.
sacred yes, like what are we creating is super super important. I've seen that absolutely like derail my own intimacy where I go like, here's me in a bid for like what are we creating in life, And it's
Mm.
like, that's like not met. And I go like, oh, this might just not happen. Or I need to like ask again in a
Yeah, well, then
different
they can
way.
go masturbate.
Yeah,
Like
indeed.
they shouldn't be masturbating in your body if they're not actually willing to respect and participate in your consciousness and the meaning.
So much. See, this is what I'm talking about, where you're like, I'm like, oh, she's really clear. And then I go like, yes, that's a good idea.
I mean, and to all of this
But
that
it's
I'm
like
sharing, I
you're
shouldn't,
like
like, I'm using
embodied.
the word should, like, I don't want to should on people, and like, my truths are not universal truths, and just like take what you want and leave the rest. I don't want to be like, this is correct for everyone. And like, this is what I have found to be correct for me, and this is what I teach.
Yeah.
So, you know,
And
take it or leave
like
it.
that's part of why I'm here, being like, I wanted to talk to you,
Yeah.
because I go like, I can feel
Yeah.
that coherence in terms of that,
Yeah.
like, like,
I
like
do.
rape culture doesn't live in your energetic sphere at all.
Oh,
That
thank
hence
you.
the like tears earlier, hence the like me being like,
Thank
oh, I used
you.
my language incorrectly there. Oh, like I can see I'm being called to like more clarity, and there's more stuff here, right? It's like, oh, it just like it doesn't. You go
Greater
like
and greater
no, and
discernment for yourself.
yeah, thank you.
Just I hope that you
Uh,
know that there's no judgment from me,
I can feel
and
that too.
that
That's why it's like,
I celebrate you, like these, the pain and the intense emotion and reactions, like may they be used for deeper discernment
yeah,
for yourself and how you embody and expand, and
yeah,
to really embrace what is your personal truth.
yeah, yeah. And it's just like, oh, you talking about it. I go like,
Yeah.
oh, it's right there. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, like
Yeah.
there is a lot of sadness still there. It's like, oh, I'm
Hmm.
gonna give birth at some point soonish. Well, not so
Mm.
soonish, but soonish is like all that, all that needs to be like embraced in a greater love, or it'll show up there. Woo! Good time to
Mm.
do the work.
It's a
Good
good
time.
time.
Good
Pregnancy is a
time.
great time to
Good time.
transmute
It's a good
that
time.
shit. Yes.
Yeah. Especially
Oh.
since I knew I had that work to do in my last pregnancy, and then I got pregnant in my next pregnancy because I wasn't fully like embodied in it, and
Mm. Yeah.
it's like, oh,
Mm.
gosh,
Mhm.
yeah. But it's really like you sort of like pulled back a little bit, and you were like, I don't want to shit on people, and I go like, "N- n-
Mm.
I, I mean, yes, we shouldn't shit on people, but also like women need coherent
Mm.
examples of what it actually sounds like to have sort of like quasi coherent consent culture over here, and like very coherent consult ugh, very
Consent.
coherent consent
Yeah.
culture over there and
Yes.
you, and it's like,
Yes.
oh, like where, like, anybody who's listening to this later can go like,
Yeah.
where am I between those two ladies, or am I like not even having the conversations, or like where, or maybe they're going like, oh yeah, I heard Sam say some other things that like weren't quite, like my own journey. Oh, there we go, comparing ladies again, but like, good luck not doing it. Good not good, right? And it's just discernment. It's like, where am I at on that journey, and like, what do I need to do
That's
to
it.
align with like what feels really resonant? Because people might go like, oh, like that way that she looks at it is like really either too affronting, I don't want to go there, or it's like like I think my past self from like 5 years ago, if I'd listened to this conversation, I would have been like, there's no fucking way I can even tackle that. Like that's so out of the realm
Mm.
of what I have bandwidth
Mhm.
for, or what I am in. And it's like it's really important to just honor where we're at and recognize like we're not going to keel over tomorrow from like having heard this conversation and realizing that we're not able to like step up to that, or having heard the conversation and being really like shaken by it, or like where I'm at, or like, but like having it sort of pull something from us where we go like, oh, there is a gem of like, I can now see more clearly like where I'm not polished, where there's like still roughness,
Mm.
or there's like a knife wound through our bodies or whatever, of like
Mm.
uh the like disrespect of ourselves through like lack of personal like centeredness to say like, no, not this, or a lot of women have like unconsensual stuff that's like physically out of their control, like true
Yes.
rape versus like what I've
Yes.
done more of, which is like self-rape or whatever, where we've been like non-consensual but like
Mm.
willing or something. I don't know. So it's like really there's a
Mhm.
like it's just an opportunity to kind of go like, oh, this is where I'm at and this is what I
Mhm.
can do now. And isn't
Mhm.
it nice to have like an example of what it feels like the love that centers a self that is really clear in being able to speak yeses and nos and maybes and in betweens and gray areas and you know the idea of having a partner who's like 100 feels 100% responsible for conception in
Yeah.
in relation to the beautiful female temple that he's like graced with every day. Just be like, oh, wow, got some work to do, or got some I'm
Yeah.
inspired by that, right? Some
Yeah.
kind, some
I really
asking to
want
do.
to take it out of the human story also, and maybe that helps
Tell me that,
people
yeah, yeah. What do you mean?
to
Like the
really respect
ecology,
our bodies as the earth and how ecosystems function, and that when
right?
man shows up in a beautiful land, he's responsible for how he impacts it.
Yeah, yeah,
And that is part of the overculture of how we turned, like how we're at this point with climate catastrophe,
yeah.
is specifically men not being responsible for their impacts on ecosystems
Hmm. Yeah.
based on their own desires of what they thought that they wanted that would feel good for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've said often, it's like women will return to sex they want to have, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
especially in that postpartum, you go like, oh yeah, it's like really just not a priority. And I go like, well, yeah, it's not a priority to like abuse your body for somebody else's pleasure, if that makes sense. It's like not a priority to like re-engage with a world of sexuality that like doesn't please you or like doesn't feel good to you. That
Hmm.
makes a lot of sense that you wouldn't want to return to that. So
Hmm.
this idea of like um, fantasy and
Hmm. Hmm.
right and like re-stepping into like what does feel good. You go like breastfeeding is more like oxytocin based pleasure connective inspiring like my need
Hmm.
for pleasure is being met that way
Yep.
because breastfeeding is like glorious when you're like fully in that oxytocin like nipple 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 like
Some people never get that.
some
But
people never
I
get that I
do
suppose
agree that
but
that is our divine design. I do think that that is
yeah
how we were designed.
yeah
And like, can you be a buddy with your friend, even if, with your partner? Like, can you be their friend in terms of like what their sexual desires are rather than feel obligated to meet them? You're just like, oh, hey, friend.
yeah
Like, I see you have needs. I am not responsible for meeting your needs, but I support you getting them met.
yeah
And like,
yeah
this is postpartum. Yeah, there's a lot there. But yeah, the fantasy is huge. The sense of desire that is intrinsic. And that's like a whole other thing. I just spent some really great time with one of my dear friends who is a sex coach primarily, My Orgasmic Life. And
nice
one of the things that we discussed on Instagram is her handle, Katrina Marie. She's great. That I just, again, is like not part of my experience of sexuality is and she speaks about this publicly on her Instagram, so I think that it's fine to share here. It's just like how much female sexuality is often dependent upon the feeling desired rather
mm,
than having desires,
mm,
and just that's something that she was raised really religious and conservative, and like that she's still coming
mm,
out of that. Like she still is like, what do I even want other than
mm,
to be wanted?
mm. To be wanted, to be chased, to be like
To be
seduced, to be
wanted. Whereas like
romanced.
I've been the aggressor sexually for most of my adult life. Like I would be like, I want that and I will have that.
Yeah.
And it's not, I mean, it's sure I want to be desired, but it's never been my biggest turn on.
Mm,
Never been like the focus of my sexuality.
interesting. Yeah, and we're
That's
also
like
unique in
a
that.
whole other portal. conversation, but I'll let us maybe
Hmm.
wind it down soon.
Yes, yes, for sure.
It's been quite a meandering flow.
Yeah, it's been really beautiful. Lots of good stories.
Hmm.
Yeah. Maybe we'll just wrap up with if people want to connect with you, if they feel inspired and connected
Oh yeah. Well,
to work with
thanks.
you or to join Fruit of Knowledge or whatever.
Yeah, my largest public offering right now is, yes, the Fruit of Knowledge learning community. And various tiers give you various access to my time and energy, essentially. There are many, many dozens of replays and archives that are available to all the tiers, and Q&As every month for all tiers as well. And then higher tiers have more access to my courses, all of my ebooks, and all of my works in progress, which I have like just
Lots.
throwing it all out there. I have like about a dozen different curriculums that are somewhere between like 70 and 90% ready to be presented, but I put them out there because I think they're still valuable. And then tier 3, I have office hours, which are just open Zoom calls where anybody can drop in and chat with me and get support. Most of my work is focused on how to avoid and end pregnancy outside of a clinical paradigm. It does meander a lot into sexuality and different, archetypal work. There's one of the works in progress is about Lilith. But yeah, a healthy menstrual cycle, contraception, and abortion are more of the focuses of what people will find studying with me these days. But I'm open to conversations about the full womb continuum. My website is my name.com. So Samantha Zipporah, Zipporah. And I am occasionally on Instagram. I've been going in and out of presence there and taking several weeks off at a time. And so you can follow me there. That would be great. Who knows how much I will actually be there. We will see. The
Indeed.
website is the best way to get a hold of me. And thank you so much for inviting me into this conversation with you and with your listeners.
Hmm.
It really is an honor I don't take lightly to be able to
Mm.
move around consciousness around these topics. And I hope folks can, take what they want that nourishes them and digest it and just, let go what's not for you. It's fine.
Hmm. Beautiful.
Mhm.
I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end.
How easily can you imagine that this experience is integrated already deeply into every cell of your being in such a way that you will begin to notice that you have already been operating from this new behavior for a while, and that it was simply a matter of noticing how much you've already been doing this. You may choose to feel that this moment is the moment that completely and utterly into your body. Or in the days and weeks ahead, getting curious about how fully and completely this experience has transformed your life, realizing that you are at complete choice to choose how you would like to integrate this information into every cell of your being.
Thank you so much for being a part of the Joygasmic Life podcast. And I am so grateful to have you here and be a part of it. If you haven't already, head over to joygasm.me to check out our Joygasmic Birth Blueprint ebook and course, which give you all of the information that you need to become a Joygasmic mama, whether you are postpartum or whether you're expecting your first baby. This course absolutely has tips and tricks for you that will help prepare you for birth, prepare you for the birth of your next child, and prepare you for peaceful and joygasmic mothering on the other side. So Absolutely. The way that we do one thing is the way that we do everything. And so, by utilizing and beginning to build a practice of Joygasmic alchemy, you will absolutely become a better mother and hold space, as I am and as many, many women are, for the enlightenment of the planet. We do that first by working on ourselves and then offering that support and that enlightened nature within ourselves to our families. And then from there, it ripples out. So, if you haven't already checked that out, go check that out now. Again, it's joygasm.me. We've also got courses on rescuing your relationship, Bulletproof Mom, how to be able to handle even the most intense toddler or special needs child later on in life, as well as a multitude of new courses that are coming out. We're absolutely grateful to get to have you as a part of that. And remember, anyone who participates in the funding of the podcast absolutely gets a membership access, which allows you to access the bonus features, the ends of some of our episodes, exercises from our guests, as well as featured free content from them. So super glad to have all of you who are a part of that already here. And thank you so much for being a part of the Joygasmic Life family. If I could leave you with only one tip for how to be an orgasmic, joygasmic mama in this world, the invite would be to really step into and embody the knowledge that you are actually here for a reason, and that reason is to be an enlightened being for your family. They chose you for a reason. They chose you on this consciousness journey for a reason. And you absolutely have the tools and skills to be able to do this. If you're struggling, please reach out. I am more than happy to help people rewire what's going on in their brain, create a new story, and create a more powerful experience so you can be the kind of mama for your kids that you really have dreamed of. You absolutely deserve it, and your children absolutely deserve it. I look forward to getting to know you more, and I look forward to co-creating through the membership content. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you on the next podcast.